Hey, this is Jake Murphy from creativity.com. A few days ago, I was insecure about finishing this novel, which is supposed to be out on pre-order in about 10 days. I actually had the pre-order deadline last month. I pushed it back a month, and I still didn't feel confident that I would actually get it finished. I went camping this weekend and got a little bit of clarity, and now I'm going to try to finish this novel in 10 days. And I want to make a little video recording how some of that process looks like. So sorry if this seems like a clickbaity title, finish novel in 10 days. I've actually been working on this particular book for a month and a half, 2 months, and I've already got about 100,000 words, but it's super, super messy and crappy. It's just a bunch of random scenes and thoughts that doesn't fit well together at all, which is why I was so, insecure about finishing, because I know how much time and work and effort is going to go into it. However, I also know a lot of similar authors. Maybe you wrote a novel for NaNoWriMo, or maybe you always write a novel for NaNoWriMo, but you've never really put in the time to finish it. So this particular video is not about writing a novel in 10 days, which I don't think is impossible. I have friends who do it, but it's about finishing. So you've written a whole bunch of words. How do you actually polish and edit it and revise it into something that is publishable in the shortest amount of time? Doesn't mean that you're going to be able to do it in 10 days because you don't have as much experience, but these will hopefully help you to reduce the procrastination and frustration that you might be feeling about your mess of a manuscript. That's what I would like to get into. Also, I think it's really useful to show you that a lot of authors, they think that they feel like they're doing something wrong when they finish their rough draft and they just can't figure out how to fix it because it's so big and there's so many pieces, they don't know where to get started. It's really easy to put that decision off forever or to feel lost. So just being able to take, your first draft and to revise it into something that's actually maybe not completely done, but done enough that you could share it with people. That's what I'm going to try to be talking through. So I noticed my process is completely messy, but I tried to put in a little bit of a bullet point at the start of this novel just so I can go through it in the video to keep me on task. But also I'll be showing you a case study of my work in progress, which, like I said, is right now crap, but will be publishable in 10 days if all goes well. So diving in right away, the first really big one is where to end scenes. I almost just called this video where to end scenes because I think that's really important. But in the context of figuring out how to clean up and revise your manuscript, that's sort of the main thing I'm doing right now. So what I tend to do is I map it out with my plotting resources, and then as I go filling in the scenes, I rename chapter headings with just a brief note about what takes place in that chapter. I've got a little bit of a word count note basically to myself. So I'm at about 20K here. I'm at about 58K down here, adding things up as I go just to kind of get a sense of how long the book is. And then I'll also be, as I add more content, I'll be going through from the beginning and cleaning it up as I go. So, a week ago, half of this book was basically done, where it's not finished at all, but it's all the stuff is in the right places. It just needs probably a final proofread and polish. But that's only to about chapter 15. So I was about here, which is, roughly halfway, but I didn't have all of these chapter headings yet. I just had 50,000 words of junk. So even if it's, sort of the content of the story in sort of the right places, it feels really overwhelming because I don't actually know how those are going to fit together. Also, I may have outlined okay, final battle scene here. The final battle scene takes place in the throne room, but I don't really have the blow by blow. How does it actually take place? So first you have to figure out what and where. And then you have to be able to fully think through that scene, which is not usually done at your computer. And you usually can't really picture it until you get to the place right before. So something I've mentioned that I do in other videos, when I get stuck or when I'm starting to feel stuck at the beginning of the chapter, I'll just make a bullet point list of the things that actually happen in that chapter. And I also split things between scenes. So my chapters are about 3,000 words, and I have about 2 scenes in every chapter with a scene break between them, so about 15,000 words, 1,500 words per scene. And then I have to, what happens in the scenes. So I have to sort of know all of that stuff, all that information, but then I still have to see clearly the picture, like walk it through in my head before I can move on to actually writing it out or trying to write some of those scenes out. And I do that on my iPhone with a Bluetooth keyboard. And then I'll put it back into my manuscript, and then I've got something, but not everything. So the first thing I kind of needed to do before I can consider revising or editing or even writing new content is just get a feel for what do I actually have? How does it fit in to my manuscript? Which is why the last couple of days, all I've really done is, reorganize all that content with chapter breaks and scene breaks. And I don't even think this is, 100% there, but I did map out basically the chapters. So I know how many chapters I'm going to have and which scenes fit in those chapters. And then in several of them, I've gone back and started adding the scene breaks as well. So now I can get a clearer sense of how much time it's going to take me. Now I've got basically 10 chapters left. I know I can probably revise a chapter a day, which is about 3,000 words. It'll probably take me 4 hours of work a day or so, which I think is reasonable for me to safely say I think I'm going to be able to publish this book on time, because otherwise I'd have to cancel my printer privileges for a year, and that's a pain in the ass. I would really like to get this book out on time. Of course, I want it to be good. If I felt like this book could not be good enough, or, on the eve of, if I feel like this book is not good enough and I'm not satisfied with the quality, I'll probably pull it and take the consequences and just apologize to my readers. I think, that's always fine to do if it's not ready. It's very difficult to predict how long it's going to take you. But I do have enough confidence right now to make a solid, consistent effort over the next 10 days and probably get pretty close to finishing. So the big part of that I feel like I've resolved is just mapping out the chapters, making chapter headings, breaking up the sections in Microsoft Word, and getting to, the ending. Then I could go back and take all of this crappy notes. I had much more down here, but I had like touching scenes, extra stuff, and I still have some work to do. But basically, as I've been writing, I've probably, not written everything in the same place. So I might have different ideas or little snippets of conversation or scene that I'm not exactly sure where they go. Now I can be copying and pasting them into roughly the right form or shape. And once I do that, then I start to have a better estimate of word count. So like I mentioned, I'm trying to get about 3,000 words per chapter. So some of these chapters that I broke up, as I'm actually getting into the text, I'm still splitting them up. This one has 4,000 words and I still have another scene to write. So maybe I'll move some of that to the next chapter. So a lot of it's still just, moving things around, but also figuring out the scene break. So let me go back up here. Where do end scenes? Because I think it is really important. You end scenes when something happens, which is the point of change. That's the purpose of every scene, is that you're writing until the point of change, until something new happens. That could be some external device, like they get attacked. It could be something that they realize. It could be an internal awareness, like a revolution, an insight, an epiphany. It could be, the realization that someone has betrayed them. It might be a discovery. They fall into the open tomb, or they figure out a clue and they realize where to go next. Something has happened. That's the point of the scene. That's where you want to break. You want to break before you move on to the reaction. So the thing happens before the characters react to it and talk about it and discuss it and plan, because that's all just boring information stuff. You want to heighten the suspense by breaking when something happens without explaining it or reacting to it. So the second part of this is before the action is resolved, leading to maximum suspense. So one of my fight scenes, for example, I had one chapter where I had, the plan, the attack, the big fight scene, and then all of the, discussions that take place after the main fight scene. So I don't really get all the urgency or the intrigue out of that fight scene because I didn't have a scene break. So ideally you want a scene break, like right when the vampire is lunging at your throat and things look the worst. That's when you break the chapter or break the scene, just because it adds so much more momentum. And then you can keep going with your scene. So this is basically what I've done today and yesterday. This is what I'm doing right now, fit it all together in the right place. Once you have your clear outline to basically to the detail, like I know what happens in the scene, I know how many words it's going to be, how it's all going to fit, then you want to start compiling. Like now, instead of the messy random notes, I can start putting all the little pieces in all the right places. A lot of these scenes that I have are basically half done. So I might have, I'll show you some of them maybe. I also tend to go and add a little asterisk by the scene I'm working on just to keep track of things. So 16 is where I had the bullet points of basically these next 3 chapters. And that's important because as I'm doing this, it's really overwhelming to think about, can I finish my entire novel in 10 days? I have no idea. But now that I've mapped it out, from chapter 16 to chapter 18, that's really just about 2 or 3 chapters. So I basically add an asterisk here and I add an asterisk here. That's how far I want to get today with the progress. So I'm limiting the scope of the work because it's hard to hold everything in your head, but I can probably hold, these 2 or 3 chapters. These are the plot events that happen in these next 2 or 3 chapters. And it's probably not exact, but like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I was going to hope that like maybe there's, 1 bullet point for every scene. So there would be 6 scenes for my 3 chapters. It didn't quite work out exactly that way because, I'm not that organized, but it would have been cool if it kind of did. So here is some actual scene that I have written. Sorry for scrolling quickly, but you don't need to actually read this stuff. I just kind of wanted to show you how to get the shape of it. So a lot of these are close to done scenes. Here's my scene break. I have some notes, like I haven't totally figured this part out. I haven't figured out the character that's gonna be in this scene yet. So I have some notes to myself with suggestions. Like I'm gonna have to add and build a new character. I'm gonna have to give some more details in life for the scene because this is, I have some conversation. I have some of this stuff, but it's not totally finished yet. Then I have some more stuff that's more scene that's pretty much done. And I scroll down to the ending of this chapter. I get to the next chapter. This one, I also start out. There's some stuff like if I forget someone's name, I'll just write XXX and then I can go back and fix it later. So maybe I haven't named this character yet. That's why it has an XXX there. And then there's a bunch of stuff in here that is like dialogue that is going to be really useful, but the whole scene isn't there yet. So I also have, this is just a block of notes that I wrote on my phone that I think could be dialogue, but I have to actually, fix all of the formatting to turn it into an actual scene rather than just a dump of notes. But that goes on for quite a while. So that's like half of my chapter. I know I have the content, I just haven't finished it yet. And then I have some other random notes. I have some romance scenes I want to add. I have another notes I want to add. I'm probably gonna have to make a checklist because there's important things that maybe need to be said, which could be like, okay, I know where all my characters are. This is a really good opportunity for me to do some backstory, sympathy building for one of my side characters, or a romantic scene between my 2 main characters if they're trapped in a room together. But I haven't really written those yet. So I kind of know the shape and I've got them in the right place. I just haven't totally written all the dialogue yet. So once you've figured out where all the scenes end, then you can fit everything together in the right place just by like trying to, take my little notes and cram them all together, even if they're not smooth. And then you want to polish and smoothen in waves. So this is going to take several times because, first you get the general shape of things, then you go back and you fill in the blank spots or you finish the scenes that are not written yet. You finish the characters or whatever. You figure out how you're going to present that new information. So this is kind of a weird in-between phase because I might actually be, writing some new words, which typically I would not do in my manuscript. I would do, on my phone. But in this particular case, because I'm not just brain dumping, 5,000 words. I'm actually trying to, it might just be 500 words of a dialogue that has to go somewhere. I'll probably just do it on my computer. I feel like that's more editing and revising, so I'm capable of doing it as I go. That's what I'm going to be doing, is just cleaning things up. The important thing for newer writers to remember, I have a lot of other videos on editing and revising and, writing in general, but here are a couple of really big ones, because these are kind of absolutely essential or crucial, and they're also what a lot of beginner writers get wrong. So a lot of manuscripts that I review or I critique, if I'm looking at somebody else's first couple chapters, these are the big issues that, will make readers give up reading. They will make editors or publishers turn up their noses or whatever. These are amateur signs of bad writing. But they're also completely common and absolutely normal. So it's not that you're like a bad writer or doing things wrong. It's just that this is the intuitive way that everybody writes books, and they just haven't learned how to do it better yet. So that's why I try to create resources to help you to do the more advanced writing or editing stuff. So the first one that's really important is increased conflict. There should be 3 kinds of conflict in every scene, which could be I've got another video on this, but there's the exterior conflict, the interior conflict, and the sidereal or lateral conflict, which is, things that are happening to me, things that I'm thinking about in my head, worries or fears or anxieties, and then your allies, like arguments between your friends or your love interests that are not really actual dangerous conflict, but they're emotional conflict. So those are the 3 kinds. You can always, no matter what's happening on screen in the scene, you can always make it much better by adding conflict. So even if it's, they're walking through the park, maybe it's an information dump or whatever, you should always have some conflict, because unresolved conflict drives the momentum of every scene. So it doesn't mean you have to have shootouts and battles. You just want to think, where is the tension? You want your characters to feel badly. You don't want them to feel happy. However, of course, you want to flip that between happy scenes and sad scenes. It's just that every time you have a happy scene, you want to twist the knife at the end of the scene with a really brutal negative thing. That's a nice balance between, the good stuff and the bad stuff. I don't know why my player keeps popping up here. But anyway, you can try to figure out, I would focus on increasing the conflict, and then if you want to have some nice, happy, meaningful scenes, they should always be a little bit bittersweet, and they should also kind of be a temporary pause on the larger issues and conflict, partly because if your characters are allowed to have too much fun, it means that the dangers and the stakes of your world building are not big enough. If they know there's a mass murderer out there, or there's an ancient sorcerer or monsters or whatever, you can have light, fun scenes, but they should never just forget about the real world dangers, because it kind of trivializes. If you've done all this scary world building stuff and then they just have a nice, happy evening in, it trivializes all of the dangers. The second one on top of increasing conflict is to add description. I typically, this is the last thing I do. This is the 4th step in my 4-step revision process. After I've smoothed everything out, after I've got all the action and the dialogue and all the content that's there, and I know, what they're doing, I'll finally go through and try to figure out what everything looks like by adding description. So the key thing here is unique. I have other videos about how to do description, but basically, most new writers will do cookie cutter, flat, or lifeless 2D characters, and that just means they're creating references. So they say he's a policeman, or he's a firefighter, he looks like a firefighter, he looks like a policeman. They don't add any different distinguishing information. So the trick to adding really good description is to say what's different about the character or the setting, not what's the same. So if you say he's a policeman, your readers automatically already have a picture of what that's going to look like. They already know the uniform, the whatever. They already have a picture. So you don't need to tell them he looked like a typical cop, and say he was in his cop car, eating donuts, drinking coffee. Like you make a caricature, which seems fake or unrealistic because it's just overused. So the way to make really great description is to create something unexpected. So unique just means something that readers are not expecting. It's a point of contrast. It's something different and interesting about the setting. Same thing with the character, but also the setting. So you go into a room, maybe it's a high school bathroom, or maybe it's a doctor's office. You don't just say it looks like a doctor's office and leave that alone. You point out what is weird or different about that scene that signifies the characters who, or the personality of the characters who interact in that space. So maybe it's the nurses or the doctors, the patients. How is that room built differently or set up differently that makes it weird or interesting and memorable in a unique way that also reveals some character information? So another one that's kind of more of a mindset thing is that not everything needs to be amazing. This is about contrast. I don't remember who exactly it was, but some famous author was something like a good novel only has to be a few great scenes and then a bunch of mediocre stuff. Most of the book is just, stability. It's just world building or scaffolding to get you to those super powerful scenes. If everything has too much description, this is something I didn't mention earlier, but description is also a way to mark a scene. People will remember the scenes that have the most description. So a flaw, a really common a sign of amateur writing is that they just overdo it on description because everything that you describe in detail is important. It has to be important because readers are paying attention to it. So if you describe something in detail, but it's just some random character who never gets seen again, or something that doesn't matter, readers will kind of feel betrayed, or they won't know what to focus on. You describe the things that you want readers to pay attention to. So if you have flowery purple prose description of everything, it'll get obnoxious and annoying really quickly because readers don't know what they should focus on. They want to get into the story, they want to care about the characters and follow the action. But if everything is just this beautiful metaphor, they have trouble distinguishing what's real. And while I'm on the topic, although this is, a whole nother tangent, but it's similar because I said the word metaphor and I have ADHD, so it kind of triggered something for me. But the problem that most new authors make also in terms of metaphors, allegories, similes, is that every time you present one of those, that authors love to use those. They love those because they think it's, beautiful writing. But the problem is every time you use one of those, you're putting a picture in readers' minds that pulls them away from the actual picture of the real scene that you want them to be paying attention to. So you want them to stay in the room and see the scene. And every time you introduce a new metaphor or analogy, it's like the waterfall or purple flowers or whatever, you're asking them to be in the scene and then imagine something outside of the scene. If you do that, 2 or 3 times every page, if you have a lot of metaphors and analogies, they're just seeing all these random pictures and it's really hard to follow the actual narrative. So something to be aware of. It's a really easy common sign of weak writing that you can, now that you're aware of it, now that you know about it, it's a really easy self-editing tool is to make sure you're describing the scene and not taking readers out of the scene. Of course, you can use some good analogies in the right places, but it's a common side of weak writing just to use them all the time, like 2 or 3 in a sentence. And that just creates this giant mess in people's brains where they're just picturing a bunch of random stuff. But anyway, the point of this one was not everything needs to be amazing, which just means your pivotal turning points. If you've looked at the plot dot, which is my 9-point plotting outline, it's got the major critical turning points at about every 15% of your manuscript. They're like the big, hard-hitting, emotional turning points. Those are the gears of the wheel. Those are the ones that have to be really, really strong. Everything else can kind of float and drift between them. Maybe not everything else has a solid point. It's just kind of there. In other videos, I've talked about how there's a lot of random junk that may seem trivial, like it's a small accidental scenes between your characters that at the end of the book will become really, really important, really emotional, because it's the journey, it's all the little sweet moments along the way that gives her the motivation to triumph at the end because she has the world worth fighting for. So it's fine, like in between, to have a bunch of kind of random flowy stuff that's sort of cool but doesn't have a point, as long as every 15% or so you really hit with a strong twist or surprise or move or something that lets readers know that your story is progressing in the right direction. It's still going to be exciting and hold their attention. So those scenes, those important scenes, those are going to be the ones with the really powerful description, because that's what's going to stick out the most. Yeah, so contrast can also just mean like you can't have every chapter be the best chapter in your book. You're going to have some chapters be amazing, or even some scenes be amazing. You're going to have some that are just, forgettable, and that's completely okay. If you try to make every chapter polished and beautiful and amazing with creative writing and stuff, it's actually going to weaken the pain point. It's going to weaken the turning points because they're going to be indistinguishable from all of the other stuff. Like if you make everything beautiful, then the normal chapters where nothing important is happening will be just as beautiful and decorated as the really important chapters, and it'll actually weaken your story. And the other thing you can do is maximize pain points. So this is sort of like I said, increased conflict, and that's true, but specifically around leading up to the final battle scene, maximize pain points, because this increases the relief or the satisfaction. The point of a good novel is dissatisfaction. You are stirring up anxiety in your readers by asking opening questions, or you add small weirdness. You have the character's ordinary world. You have increasing weirdness that your character cannot process, cannot deal with, until there's too much and your character is thrown on this adventure or journey until they finally are forced to change enough to triumph at the end. The more you twist the knife or maximize these pain points, the greater the relief or the satisfaction when you resolve everything at the end. So if you imagine this as like pulling a rubber band, you want to pull a rubber band and then keep pulling until like you're not even sure if it's going to break or not, and you're a little bit scared that it's going to break and you're going to snap yourself and it's going to hurt. You want it to be that tight. So don't kind of half do it. Don't just have like some moody tension. Make sure the pain point is real and the stakes are real, because that's the only way you're going to get that powerful sense of relief or satisfaction, which is really ultimately what a good novel will do for you. It's a little bit of a catharsis where you're, putting your readers in an anxious state and then giving them some relief. So I'll actually give you some spoilers for this book. This is the third book in a vampire dystopian series that I've been working on for a while. And I generally think in pictures, so I generally know in my final battle scenes basically how it's going to look. And I'll basically play with images until I get the most, traumatic, emotionally powerful image that I can. And that's what I'll use for my scene. So the funny thing is, actually, even though I've got 10 days left, I'm not exactly sure about my pain points in this novel yet. So if I go back here, I've got, some little notes on plotting, and then I've got this twist. This is like my big final twist towards the end. It's not my ending because the twist generally happens. It doesn't have to. There's lots of different twists, but this is like my just before the dark night of the soul twist where, things get really, really bad. I actually take that back. I have a bunch of things going on, and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work out, but I think my dark night of the soul is about here with the death of a side character, total failure of the mission. So that's going to lead to some depression, some bad stuff. She's going to make a deal with the devil sort of thing, return to her home, which is now burned. And her motivation is trying to break into the capital, fight a bunch of vampires, and save her siblings. So that's kind of what she's trying to do. And so my actual twist comes about here. So this is like 3 chapters towards the end. So my battle scenes tend to be drawn out. I don't know if you've gone through my plotting resources, but there's actually 2 battle scenes. Because in the first battle they have to fail, and that's sort of what happened back here. The first big battle was a total failure. They break in, something happens, the plan goes wrong. There's a bunch of stuff about, they're trying to, it's a plan, it's not just go in fighting. So they're trying to do a bunch of things. There's a bunch of smaller scenes that happen. But finally, she faces off with her nemesis here, her main nemesis, and there's a big twist. And that's what is going to happen here. She gets out of it, she gets rescued, and then there's going to be another final battle scene. But so I'm still figuring out exactly what this twist is because I've had a few different ideas that I have not completely committed to yet. But I'll show you them as an example of potential pain points. Basically, how can I make this scene hurt the most? So the first idea is that she's trying to save her young siblings, but the villain has turned them into vampires. So he locks her up with them. They're hungry and violent. She has to defend herself against them, which is a pretty powerful twist. I like the visual imagery. I like the how much it would hurt. Basically, she's trying to save her siblings. She's not sure if they're still alive, but then she's locked in a room with these hungry little vampires and she has to fight them off. I think that's, interesting. But the other version of this that I also pretty much like is the villain locks her vampire love interest up with her young siblings after starving him, so he has to fight her love to protect her family. So basically, her vampire boyfriend would be locked up but starving, and her siblings would be locked up. So if she unlocks the wrong person first, then the vampire, who's just a raving animal at this point, would try to eat her or try to eat her siblings. So she'd have to fight off her love interest to save her siblings. Some kind of a really brutal emotional choice. The other one that's even worse is like if this already happened and he already let the vampire boyfriend feed on the children. So maybe they're not dead, but maybe, she walks in and her love interest is already feeding on her siblings. That would be pretty powerful. The other thing I was thinking about with this scene is that she's basically, the sun was turned off for like 100 years, and she's basically turned off this ash machine that covers up the sky. So now there's sun again for the first time in a long time. And so it's sort of her fault, but there could be a scene where the vampire love interest is chained to a pillar at night and they're both locked up, but if they wait long enough. So it's basically a countdown timer. In 3 hours, the sun is going to be up and then he's going to burn because you turned the sun back on. It's all your fault. That could be really powerful. At this point, a really big part of novel writing is that in the first half of your book, the protagonist is not going to feel guilt or responsibility because they are not taking action. So the point of the midpoint is that they start taking action and making decisions that impact the plot, and then they are personally responsible, so that by the time you get to the end of the final battle scene, they can feel personal guilt or responsibility or whatever, which makes, the ending a lot more satisfying. If they don't care, if they just say like, this isn't my problem, I'm just going to go home, that doesn't work. So you have to make them motivated and personally committed with some emotional guilt because, they did something that did not go well. That's partly on them. So these were sort of my 3 or 4 choices. And there was another one which I might still do, which is like, because there's a brother or sister. So possibly one of them is already turned. Maybe the brother is a little vampire and the sister's not yet. So there's that dynamic between them. There's too much. Basically, the reason I couldn't decide is that there's way too much for this one scene between the vampire and the son and the siblings and the vampire versus the siblings and her. I don't exactly know how it's all going to fit together. I might have to separate some of those elements so that it could still be pretty powerful as separate scenes rather than all in one scene. But those are the type of, for this book to be really emotionally satisfying, what I have to do is maximize the pain points as much as possible. You're basically boiling a pot of water, and you have to make sure the pot of water is over boiling before you turn it off. So it's your job as a writer to kind of keep adding to the temperature, to keep building the temperature without the relief, making it worse and worse and worse. It's not just a one-time easy final battle scene where they win. And even my final battle scene, which I might talk about a little bit here, since I'm on this topic, how to do I have another video on final battle scenes that's really important. But let me skip down to this one, which is the last one. It's kind of an add-on, but it's also something I think is really, really important, especially for new writers who don't have a lot of experience with novels. This is like, besides earlier I said the things you have to add are conflict and description. That's usually how you would fix, a new writer's mediocre writing into something much better, is to figure out where the conflict is and then add description. Those are the two big ways to improve your manuscript. However, a lot of authors also have a huge disadvantage with their backstory content, with their info dumps, with their flashbacks. So they have, 5 or 6 different flashbacks within the first chapter, or they have a bunch of narrative prose where the author is giving information for free that has nothing to do with the characters. They're just standing around. That totally doesn't work for novel writing. And there's a place for it. You can give flashbacks and they can be powerful, but they need to be in the right places. And that's almost never at the beginning of the story. The story starts with the action to get readers hooked. They don't care about your characters yet. They don't care about your character motivation yet, or what happened to them a long time ago. And the more powerful or dramatic the reveal is, the more you want to resist it, the less you want to give it away. If you just give it away, like in the first chapter, it doesn't have any emotional gravitas. You have to hold it back and pull that rubber band and stretch it out so that readers are always wondering why the characters are so motivated by this scenario. And then finally you can reveal the backstory. Probably like in the middle of the final battle scene is the best place for it. So I do have another video on final battle scenes and on showing versus telling, but let me mention this really quickly because it is super important. Everything is in scene, which means a current moment of action, speech, thoughts, or deeds. Of course, there are some examples of books that aren't linear, but if this is your first novel, or even if it's not, like if you look at 95% of popular fiction out there, most of them are linear. Most of them go through an orderly process. They may have some flashbacks, and yeah, it's difficult to figure out where your flashbacks need to go or where they belong in your manuscript, but that's why I have written and published so much information out there about this. So I've got other stuff that very clearly lets you know where all your backstory reveals belong. But even then, the point is that it's got to be in the current moment of action, in the speech, thoughts, or deeds. So whatever you're showing is coming from characters. It's what your characters are seeing, feeling, actively. And I say active, but I actually mean like if you're writing simple past tense, which is most common for novel writing, he said, she went, whatever. Yes, it already happened, but it feels like the present moment of the scene that is evolving. So that's kind of where you want to stick with. So when you're doing a character reveal or whatever, it's when the character is thinking. It's going to be assumed. It's when your protagonist or when your character is thinking or feeling about those things. So, if it's something that happened 20 years ago, they're not just on a random day going to be thinking through or reliving that moment 20 years ago. They're not going to be doing that. You want to focus on their normal day and do the whole book. And then at the ending, that's when you would flash back to that memory, that very important, very founding memory. Probably this is where, the point of a final battle scene is this is where the character has a great personal shift of awareness or conviction or confidence. And often it's whatever that founding trauma was that led to their fatal flaw. This is the moment they revise, they go back and they relive that childhood trauma, and they come away with a new understanding or a new awareness, a deeper appreciation, something that they believed their whole life was a lie, and now they understand more. Now they're more competent or more powerful because of that change. So that change that happens, typically it's in the middle of the final battle scene. It might be a flashback then. That's when you give your backstory, but that's because it's personally critical for your character's next action. It's absolutely necessary for your character's next action. It's being relived by your character. If you just gave it in the first chapter, it would just be an author dump, an information dump. So that's basically what show don't tell means. Showing is if it happens in the active scene and it happens to your characters. Your characters are acting out a play, and you can only show what you can see or hear if you're sitting in the audience. You can say, like, she looked anxious. You can show body images, but you can't say she was anxious, because you in the audience, you're just seeing. You don't know inside her head. Yes, there are third-person omniscient narration. There are different strategies, but for fantasy, certain things are more common. But generally, for most popular fiction, I would be careful about the basic way to distinguish between showing versus telling. Is it's stuff you can see versus stuff that you, the narrator, know by magical means. It's not, you're not seeing it in the scene. Your characters aren't saying it out loud. You just, you're the creator of the story. You're just making stuff up, and you're just telling narrators how they should interact or how they should approach or how they should interpret the scene. So basically, like, this would be if you had cue cards. Like, there are characters silently acting out a play on stage, and then you, the author, are standing there with cue cards telling them how they should feel or giving them background information so that they know how to process this. That's not as good or not as powerful as getting out of the way and just letting them watch the play. And to do that, you have to really think about, how are my characters? How do they look? How do I know that they are anxious? How do I know that they are worried about, or how do I know that they're reminded of something that happened 20 years ago if it's not something I can show, if it's not something visible? So for example, they can, they pick up a keepsake or a token that's a reminder of the thing that happened 20 years ago, and they finally confess it to another character, and they talk out loud about the thing that happened. That's how you can show it on stage, basically, rather than just putting it all in narration. So one little example sentence, a normal sentence might be, she said angrily, and that's it. That's why people avoid or tell you to avoid adverbs. They're basically fine. If you want to communicate something very quickly, if it's not important, she was angry, she said angrily, fine if that's not the important thing. Because like I mentioned, if you really describe it in detail, that's going to become the important thing. So if it's not the important thing, you can get away with some adverbs. But if it is the important thing, adverbs is telling. So she said angrily, I'm just telling you that she was angrily. I'm not showing you anything. Whereas if I said her brows furrowed, her cheeks turning red with frustration, she stormed out of the room, that's like 3 different things. And that's the opposite side. So that's over showing. Where basically if I, not only am I telling you that she was angry, I'm also showing you 3 different ways that she was angry, which comes across as melodramatic or comical even. So the other thing that new writers often do, especially when, and I haven't even mentioned this yet, not in this video at least, anyway, but emotional outbursts. The other sign of weak writing is that everything is emotional. All your characters are just super, they're crying or they're laughing, like a hyena. They're slapping the table. Everything is overdone and overblown because they're trying really hard to show you, in the scene, but it just comes off as like really bad acting where everything's over the top or farcical because it doesn't feel realistic. So you do want to show it. That's the right impulse, but there's a scale, and it's not just you always want to show and you never want to tell, there's a balance between them. You want to avoid showing too much in an unrealistic way, because actually most people do not have emotional outbursts. Most people, don't cry in public or laugh at whatever, especially in a situation that's dangerous with strangers where they're feeling a lot of anxiety or worries or fears. And it's only really going to become important when you push them to the breaking point. So if you have a lot of emotional outbursts in the first few chapters, your final scenes are not going to be believable, because what's she gonna do? She's gonna cry again. She's gonna yell or scream and throw dishes again. You can only have like one big emotional outburst, and that's got to be the max pain point towards the end of the book. If you start off with a bunch of stuff, that's false conflict. That's making your characters become melodramatic because you don't have any real conflict in the scene, and it's not believable motivation because their reactions to the events are overblown and unrealistic. So that's basically all I wanted to say in this video. On the one hand, I think this where to end scenes point is the main point of this video, is just, the difference between a finished novel and a crappy manuscript is mostly figuring out your organization and where to put all the pieces. That's the most difficult part, but it helps you to branch out. Instead of trying to figure out everything, do 2 or 3 chapters at a time in like a chunk. Like, how do I get from this point to this point? That's why my plot dot works really well, is because everything is in 15% chunks. So it's basically 3 chapters or so. And then you can just write through to the next major turning point and make sure you highlight those and fix those. But then also, if like, for me personally, these are not all of the things that I will be working on, because these are some things that I figured out a long time ago. But for most new writers, if you have a new manuscript and you're trying to revise or edit your manuscript to make it publishable, to try to get a book deal, to self-publish and actually sell it and get good reviews, these are the really big issues. There's a ton of other things. I've got a whole list of like 100 different common writing mistakes to avoid and stuff. But if you're revising your manuscript, this is the super important big stuff that hopefully I've helped you to understand. I'm sure you've heard some of this advice before, but you have to hear it 100 different ways before it finally clicks, and you have to hear it at the right time when you need it, after you've already got the experience of writing and trying to revise your own writing. So sometimes it's just about hearing the right thing at the right time. Hopefully this video helped you with a few things. If so, leave me a comment or any other questions that you might have. So once I finish all of this up, I'll typically go through a few rounds of revision. Like, I'll clean it up, I'll put everything in the right place, I'll smooth it up until it's like all the content is there, it fits together, and then I'll actually start editing it. So I'll go through the whole thing once, looking for typos, fixing mistakes, grammar errors, or whatever. I'll be adding a lot of notes in my side, which is often turns into like extra scenes. So I'll have to go through. I already cleaned the first half of this pretty well, so it's more in the second half where I have all these notes. But I'll have to go through and fix my notes and add in all the extra content, the extra scenes. And then I'll go back through with Grammarly, which is a plugin for Word. I open Grammarly. I don't do all issues. I'll just go for correctness. Grammarly is pretty good about finding actual errors or typos. So it'll find the ones that I have missed. It'll probably find 20 or 30 that I missed. I still probably won't get all of them, but even with a professional editor, even if you've done it a lot, you want to do as much as you possibly can. And Grammarly, is just one extra way to find more of the problems. But you do have to do it manually. So you go to correctness and you'll have to go down, skip down through everything it flags. It might flag 500 things, but only 20 of them are actually mistakes, and the others you can just ignore. You've got to make those manual decisions, but it does help you to, like, I'll read through it all again with Grammarly on, and I'll just basically skim or scan down to the underlined words that it's pointing out to find all the problems. Then I'll just clean it up and get it ready for formatting. I've already added my my copyright page, which I need to actually update. 2022, first book published in 2022. I've already got a cover. This book's already up on pre-order. And I basically just have to upload the file. So, hopefully I can get, I need, time to actually revise and edit. It's scary to be still writing content with only 10 days left. But hopefully in 6 or 7 days, this book will be pretty much done. And then I'll just be going through with the final revision, like the final proofreading and the final edits, basically fixing the little notes, fixing like the little detail work. And then I'll upload and publish it and it should be done. Anyway, that's how to finish a book in 10 days. Typically, it takes me 2 months to write a book, but I have been able to write like 5,000 words in a day. So it is possible. I know for myself that I could actually write a 50,000 word book in 10 days. So it's not, it's not complete bullshit. It is something that some people can do. But this is more about, that's just the writing. And then you also need the editing and the revision, depending on what kind of writer you are. I have some pantser friends who write by the seat of their pants, and they just write really well in the first draft and they send it to an editor and it's done. Like they don't do any revision. That's amazing. I'm not that kind of a writer. I like to plot and, it's a very, very messy process. You're probably somewhere on the spectrum and there's no easy way to write a book. So everybody has like their own hacks or cheat sheets born out of desperation and experience. But if you are still working on your first book, I've written, 20 or 25 novels or something. So I'm starting to have quite a bit of experience of this process. These are some of the things that I noticed that I was doing today that I thought might be useful if I shared with you. That's the end of this video. Thanks a bunch. See you next time. Bye-bye.